your daily writing habit. If you are writing a book or thinking about it, or maybe you've started writing your book but you need some help getting it done, you are in the right place. Good morning, everyone. I'm your host, Christine Whitmarsh. If you're looking for me online, look for Christine Inc., like that stuff we write with. Each day I'm sharing with you the writing habits I've learned over my 20 years as a ghostwriter, book coach, and author. I have found that three things in particular have a huge impact on your success as an author, and they can even turn someone who barely thinks of themselves as a writer into a published book author. Those three things, my pillars here on the show, are writing fundamentals, productivity, and mindset habits. And once again, good morning, everyone. Here today on the show to talk about self-doubt, procrastination, and perfectionism in authors is my guest and fellow book coach, Heather Campbell. I got it. I discovered Heather's work through her recent article in Jane Friedman's very awesome newsletter entitled How to Overcome Perfectionism to Achieve Your Writing Goals. And I will put that link in the show notes today. I could tell from the article almost immediately that we were like-minded, habits-oriented book coaches, so I knew I needed to have her here on the show. So here's a little bit more about Heather. Heather is a book coach, writer, and reformed perfectionist who helps writers develop tools to overcome their self-doubt, procrastination, and perfectionism so they can create lasting and effective writing habits to complete a novel. She has more than 5 years of experience working one-on-one with writers. When she's not immersed in fiction, she's running in the fresh mountain air of Colorado or snuggling with her rescue dog, Chase. Find out more at thewriterremedy.com and follow her on Instagram at thewriterremedy. I'll put all of this stuff in the show notes. And welcome, Heather. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to talk to you today.
Awesome. And a big reason I'm actually excited to have you on the show is really to showcase how broad the definition of book coach can be, just in case people think that as book coaches, we're basically correcting grammar and kind of undangling participles and things like that. You know, like my coaching practice, for instance, focuses on a balance of writing fundamentals, productivity, and mindset habits to help primarily nonfiction authors, memoir authors, finish their books. And I see that you specialize in helping fiction authors overcome mindset issues, one of my favorite types of habits, like self-doubt, procrastination, and perfectionism. So tell me how you got into writing and then into book coaching, and especially those three awesome areas.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I have always been a lover of both fiction and nonfiction, but I think fiction has always been the first love for me. And, as many writers who, come up with fiction, it's because we've read so much of it. And we always have that idea in the back of our minds, well, I could do this, right? We think that it should be easy and that we should have this sort of natural talent for it. The other thing about fiction is just that it speaks so deeply to the human experience. And I think that that's why it was always something that interested me, particularly as a reader and a writer. So, I had always had this desire to write a novel. And over years and years and years, I kept attempting it. And there was just something blocking me. And I couldn't figure out what it was because, as we'll get into, I had a lot of issues around self-doubt and perfectionism and imposter syndrome and all of the things. And so, I just kept trying to find different ways. I thought if I could find the perfect way to plot a novel, or if I could find the perfect program or something, it would just be easy for me. I would eventually be able to make it all click. And all of a sudden I'd be able to finally achieve this dream of writing fiction. And I came across book coaching because, I thought that was going to be the thing, on the other side of it, getting book coaching would help me, overcome all of these things that I didn't have the words yet for them. So I actually, instead of getting a book coach first myself, I went through training thinking, well, I'll learn, what they have to teach me. I went through the Author Accelerator coaching program. So I was like, I'll learn what they have to teach me about both writing and book coaching. And, I can possibly become a book coach because I had already had several years of experience working with writers on nonfiction and articles. I worked with college students on essays and stuff. And then I realized I love book coaching. And also, the thing that's holding me back is not that I don't have the right system or that I don't know enough about writing fiction or that I don't know enough about story craft or grammar. I was like, I
Yeah.
really know a lot about grammar. Why is this, so hard for me? It's because I have this perfectionist mindset. It's because I have this belief that it should just come easily to me if I can just figure out the right way to do it. And I should be able to do it, right on the first try. And, I don't have to put in the effort to create this process or these habits. Like the muse should just come to me and I should be motivated. So probably what you're hearing is a lot of shoulds and a lot of myths around writing. And once I realized that that's what was holding me back, I was like, oh, there are a lot of other writers that struggle with this too. And I want to be able to help them realize that what it is perfectionism, but it's not something that you're stuck with forever. You can absolutely put in place the habits and the processes to overcome this thing and finally achieve your dream of writing that fiction book.
Yeah, and there's so many things that you just said that were so interesting, especially the finding the right system. I see this all the time, like Scrivener, that will solve my problem, or some other fancy software, or the right outline, or this and that. And as I've learned through we were talking before the call about the 20 years of ghostwriting and 20 years of helping coach people. It's just like, yeah, it's you almost want to say it's all in your head. It's not, there's no like Masters of Fine Arts degree or writing degree or the right outline or the right writing program. In fact, for me personally, like nothing against Scrivener, but that was like overwhelming for me. It's like I just need like a notebook and I'll be fine. But so that's really interesting. I said, just going from all the shoulds. I should know how to do this, so maybe I'm outlining it wrong or something like that. So very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge with fiction. And I don't know if you see this as much with nonfiction, but there's sort of this myth that you're just like either gifted with the ability to write a novel, to write a compelling story, or you're not. And I totally reject that idea. I think we all have to learn how to write a novel, and we have to learn how to embrace the process of figuring it out.
Absolutely. And learning how to write. Yeah, the idea of a gift, I just, that's, a lot of people are born with gifts maybe, but it's the investment of the time and the repetition that turns the gift into a skill. So a gift doesn't really go very far with me because it's like, that's nice. There's probably a lot of people that are naturally gifted in areas, but until you invest and turn it into a skill, it doesn't really mean anything. And I don't think anybody's born as a gifted novelist. They need to actually write hundreds of thousands of words until they get there. It takes a lot of practice, no matter how quote unquote gifted they are. And that's, that's the writing fundamentals habit.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So what do you think it is about us as authors, as creatives, that seems to make us a magnet for mindset issues like self-doubt, procrastination, and perfectionism? Or do you even agree with that? Do you think we're kind of a magnet for that? If so, like, why is that?
Yeah, well, I think that's something that writers tend to have is maybe more self-awareness and more also awareness about people and interpersonal relationships. And, we tend to be able to pick up on those kinds of things, because we've done a lot of reading and, studies show that reading promotes empathy and it promotes understanding of other people. So it makes sense that we'd be more perceptive to those things. But we also spend a lot of time in our heads. We spend a lot of time in our heads thinking about what we're writing, and then actually the process of writing is very introspective. So I sort of think that that's why, we spend so much time in our head and we spend so much time, honestly, second guessing what we are capable of, second guessing the words that we're using, second guessing the potential and the opportunities that we have. So I think, it's a double-edged sword. Being very aware and self-aware is great for fiction and it's great for good writing, but it also makes us a little bit more prone to the self-doubt and the imposter syndrome.
So true, especially memoir authors, because then when people are writing their memoirs, they become even more so of all the things that you just said. So we become just walking empaths when writing a memoir.
Right. I mean, you are sitting down and committing yourself to examining your life and everything that you've done. It's hard to walk away from that not feeling a little self-conscious.
Just a tad. I finally wrote mine after writing other people's and helping other people with their memoirs for so many years, and I released mine last year, The Power of the Curve, and I really, not like in a snobby way, thought I knew everything there was to know about writing a memoir, but boy, was I shocked throughout the entire process of being in my client's shoes. And talk about empathy. I have like a lot more empathy for my memoir authors now because, it's not that before it was just like, yeah, just write your book. But now when they, express their, challenges and mindset issues and everything with me, I'm just like, oh, I so understand what you're going through right now.
Yes, yes. And I think that's really important, that another thing that we don't necessarily realize is that writing the novel or the memoir or the nonfiction book is different than coaching. They're two different skill sets and they require, different knowledge and strengths. So, it's great when we can combine both of those things, but it's definitely good for us as coaches on the other side as writers to understand what our writers are going through.
Absolutely. I think this is why in medical school they have them play patient as part of the required training so they can see what it's like to be in the gown and the exam room and the whole thing. So I think it's useful for, I think, most careers. Yeah. So what kind of strategies, if you want to share, if you want to even do it from like a big picture, do you use to help your fiction authors overcome some of these mindset issues that you specialize in?
Yeah, definitely. So, the biggest thing with perfectionism is, and this was the crux of the article that you found me through, is that perfectionism is not really about being perfect. The actual motivating factor behind perfectionism is that we just want to appear perfect so that we can avoid, the shame and the potential rejection that might come from being imperfect. We are very afraid that if people see our imperfections, they won't love or appreciate us anymore. And as you know, writing is a very imperfect process. So perfectionism basically inspires us to put in place habits that keep us from really taking a risk and, potentially doing something imperfect or doing it messy because we're afraid about what that means about ourselves. So overcoming that really involves two sides of the coin, which are working on those habits, breaking down the perfectionist habits and putting in place habits that are more aligned with a growth mindset. And then it is, working on that mindset piece. So from a very high level, perspective, I think it's important that you really put that process in place. Perfectionists, like I said, sort of feel like, well, if we're meant to do something, it should come easily to us. And so, we actually shy away from putting processes in place. We shy away from effort because we see effort as a sign of inadequacy. So often perfectionists are pantsers and we sort of feel like, well, I should just be able to pants or write this novel by the seat of my pants. And if I'm any good at this, it will turn out well. No, we have to break that down. So I like to start with writers in the planning stage and really putting together an outline for their novel. Make sure that we're hitting on all of the pieces of what makes for compelling fiction. And that's both looking at, deep character development, but it's also looking at certain beats that, your readers expect you to hit. And it might be genre conventions too, depending on the specific genre that you're working in. So planning out the novel is a really important part of that. And then planning out your writing process is, another part of that. So actually sitting down at the beginning of the week and scheduling out your writing sessions so that you have time blocked on your calendar. And what that does is it starts reinforcing a self-belief that you're the kind of person that gets the writing done. Something, that you mentioned at the top, procrastination goes hand in hand with perfectionism because, again, we're afraid that by undertaking the action, by actually doing the writing, we're going to find out that we're not any good. So we procrastinate both by just not writing, but by doing a lot of other things that aren't writing so that we don't have to face the fear of, again, being imperfect. So when you schedule your writing sessions and you actually show up for them consistently, you start breaking down that mindset and that belief that you're just a procrastinator and you never get it done. And creating that evidence is a really important part of both changing your mindset and your habits. And then from there, I think the added accountability of working with a coach and having either weekly or every other week deadlines is just another layer of accountability. It's sort of like the training wheels when you're first developing a new habit. Ideally, working with me, my writers go on to be able to write consistently on their own. But when you're first developing these new habits, you do sort of need a little bit of extra help, especially when you've spent, maybe years and years of your life avoiding creating writing habits and avoiding doing it consistently and telling yourself that you're just not the kind of person who can do this sort of thing. So the habit side is a big part of it, but then it's also the mindset. So with the weekly deadlines, there's also weekly coaching where we talk about the sneaky ways that perfectionism is showing up in the process, or we talk about different ways that, writers can overcome like the desire to procrastinate in the moment, or the fears that come up, or, all of the different mindset things that keep them stuck. So it's definitely process plus mindset work. And I think the one other thing that I always like to mention is journaling. If you're already a writer, you probably think pretty well on paper. And it's also a really great way to get yourself out of mindset loops where you might not even realize that you're telling yourself a story, that you are not the type of writer who can finish a novel, or you're just the type of person who always procrastinates, or you just don't have what it takes. All of these stories that we tell ourselves, we don't even notice. And then when you sit down and you journal about it, you actually break that cycle and you become aware. And the more you become aware after the fact, you kind of shift that awareness up. So you start to notice when you're doing it in the moment, and then you can even start to notice before you get into those mindset, cycles, and you can more easily break them before they even start.
So true. Such good stuff. And if you just listed so many great habits, and I know I have a favorite one that I like to preach about. I guess anybody listening to this show probably knows which one it is, but if you had to pick kind of like the favorite habit that you, obviously they're all very important, but the favorite habit that you find yourself talking to clients the most about, which one of those would it be?
Yeah, this is a surprising one because it's the thing that I resisted myself for the longest time, but it's scheduling. It's scheduling ahead of time. And why I resisted it was because I felt like it was going to make me very rigid, and we kind of think, well, I should write when I'm motivated or when I feel creative. But then that leads to us just not writing, versus when I actually scheduled the time, I was more productive, and I realized that I was actually becoming the writer that I wanted to be. And it's 100% the reason why I was able to write a first draft of my current project in less than 6 months, because I scheduled that time and I showed up for it. And I'm really proud of that.
That's awesome. Not surprisingly, you and I both agree on our favorite habit. I call it the writing cave, but the writing, the scheduling the time. That's the one that I preach about the most. I feel like, and you probably feel like this too, like when I get new coaching clients that they're asking about, traditional versus, self-publishing and launching and marketing and word counts. They talk about all these things, and I'm just like, let's start with, where is writing on your schedule?
Yes. Let's get to the very most basic thing. How are you going to get this done?
Absolutely. Same page there. And I know on my side of the coaching sphere, I'm passionate about coaching memoir authors. I'm so obsessed with helping people craft their life story. So what is about fiction? You've kind of hit on it a few times already, but what's the thing that you love the most about fiction? Like, why coach fiction versus nonfiction?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it comes down to sort of the thing that I alluded to before, that fiction inspires empathy. I think it's one of the most important parts of the human experience, is being able to put ourselves in other people's shoes and to see their perspectives and to, learn from their experiences. And then on the other side of things, especially in the last couple of years, I've gone to fiction for escape, and I think that the entertainment value of fiction is just as important as, as the fact that it inspires that empathy, and it teaches us things. But I think the entertainment value is just as important, and it really helps people feel, particularly when you're going through a tough time, it helps you feel like you're not alone. So all of those reasons, I think fiction is just, I think it's one of the best things that we can engage in.
Absolutely. And the actionable part, I like to be actionable on the show here for all the fiction authors listening to the show today, especially ones that are like really, really super, super stuck writing their novels. Maybe they've been trying it for, like you did in your past, many years now.
Yeah.
If you could give them leave them with one piece of actionable advice today to start getting unstuck and moving forward, maybe something they could do even like right after listening to our conversation, what action step would you give them?
Yeah, well, I think, can I cheat a little bit and say two things?
Yeah, you can.
So the action step that I would give you right after this call is to journal. Particularly if you're feeling stuck, I would encourage you to interrogate why you're stuck, and more so the emotions that are keeping you stuck. So a lot of times, when we procrastinate or when we get stuck with writing, there's an underlying fear, and it might be fear that the writing itself isn't good enough, or it might be fear that we don't have the skills to do what we need to do with a given scene or with a revision, or whatever it might be, or it's a fear that the idea isn't the right idea, or any number of things. And so one of the best ways to overcome that is curiosity. And so right away, get out a piece of paper, write by hand, journal about what it is that is keeping you stuck and what you are afraid of. And you might in that process also discover that some of those fears are unfounded. But you also might find yourself coming up with counterpoints to those fears. Okay, I'm afraid that I don't have an answer for what should happen next in this book, but I could try this and this and this and see if any of those things work. And then I think in the long term, the biggest piece of advice for overcoming, perfectionism and self-doubt that I have is that it's about persistence. It's not about how skilled you are right now. If you persist with the work, you will develop the skills that you need to do what you want to do with your story. So we feel really prone to wanting to quit, wanting to give up at the first sign that something isn't working out, because we're afraid, right? Again, it comes back to that fear of shame and rejection. But if you can just push through that, if you can just keep writing forward, if you can try different things, and if you can really look at this as an opportunity to learn and develop your skills, then you will get so much further than if you just, think that you have to get it right on the first try. And if you don't, your hopes and dreams for writing a novel are lost.
Such good advice. Yeah, like the novel police are going to show up at your door and say, you did it wrong. You're banned from writing now.
Yeah, no. You can always try again. Always try again. And I think that's the biggest thing is, just try and reframe anything like that. Every time I have a writer I've had a couple of writers who have said, I wrote the scene and it doesn't work and I don't like it and I feel so dejected. And I'm like, but the good thing is you've figured out one way that it doesn't work. That means that you're one step closer to figuring out how it does work. So it's just really important to always reframe what you're doing as progress. There are no failures in this process. You're just always moving closer and closer to figuring out what actually does work.
Absolutely. It's like, what's it, the Thomas Edison quote about he's tried 10,000 ways that didn't work or something like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Very good advice. And that journal, I like that journaling exercise you just gave everyone. It reminds me of the all-purpose, what's the worst thing that could happen? And once you get it on paper and out of your head and you look at it and you say, okay, well, if that happened, how would I solve it? And then once you figure out how to solve it, you're like, okay, it's no longer a big scary monster, at the end of the hallway behind the door anymore, because now I've faced it versus, what's the worst thing that can happen floating in your head all the time.
Absolutely. Totally.
Yeah. So thank you again for being here. And how can people learn, what's the best place to contact you? I know I was talking to someone this morning, the 7,000 different ways, all the social media sites or whatever. And I know everybody kind of has their favorite way of people contacting them. So how do you prefer that people contact you?
Yeah, well, I am very active on Instagram, and I'll just mention my handle again. It's The Writer Remedy, and I will respond to DMs and comments there quite quickly. So if you want to get in touch with me, um, and I'm happy to answer questions in DMs and all of that. So that's the best way to get in touch with me, but also through my website and my email, which is heather@thewriterremedy.com. I'm pretty responsive there as well.
Excellent. I think that's how I contacted you. I'm such a website person.
Yes.
I'm so old school.
Yeah.
Well,
no,
thank you.
and that works too.
Awesome. And thank you again for being on the show today, Heather. This was really fun, coach to coach.
Yeah, I appreciate, again, just the opportunity to talk with you and to bounce ideas, because we are so aligned in the way that we approach this.
Yeah. And thank you all for joining me here on Your Daily Writing Habit, where I am helping you write and finish writing an awesome book. And be sure and drop by my Inc. Authors group on Facebook to connect with other authors like yourself. Until tomorrow, happy writing.